The starship Honor's path drifted in the half-light between systems, its hull catching the faint shimmer of a distant nebula like dust on steel. Beneath its surface, the ship's engines murmured with restrained potential, cycling through their long-range sequences as the vessel continued its solitary scouting mission. The ship belonged to the Interstellar Assembly of Earthborn Nations, a diplomatic and exploratory body formed in the unsettled era after humanity first stepped beyond its cradle. Honor's path was among its most cherished constructs, built not for war, though it could defend itself admirably, but for understanding. It carried tools to analyze entire biospheres, translators capable of correlating thousands of languages, and a crew selected as much for their insight as their courage. The mission was meant to be peaceful. That was the intention, at least, until the days when intention no longer aligned with reality. Captain Rennick Arvad stood at the forward deck, facing the starfield through a panel of crystal polymers that magnified clarity far beyond human eyes. His reflection looked older than he felt, with silver in his hair that had not been there during his first command. The years had carved deeper lines into his face, not from fear or loss, but from the relentless determination that held his crew together. Rennick had always believed that humans could rise to meet the unknown with open hands rather than closed fists. But belief, he was beginning to realize, was not a shield. "Captain," said a voice behind him, even and calm, belonging to the ship's science officer, Selene Varant. "We have detected another pattern in the substrate emissions from the region ahead." Rennick turned, eyebrows raised. "Another pattern, the third in the last cycle." "The fourth," Selene corrected, holding a data tablet with a crystalline surface that glowed beneath her touch. "Each time the amplitude increases. We are tracking the source to the region previously identified as a gravitational hollow, but the distortions are unlike anything we have catalogued." Rennick walked toward her, scanning the figures. Patterns unfurled across the tablet, lines of violet and gold, tracing a waveform like the heartbeat of some enormous, slumbering creature. "It almost feels intentional," he murmured. "Yes," Selene replied, "and that is what concerns me." Across the deck, the navigation officer, Harvan Toll, lifted his gaze from his console. "Captain, the hollow is coming into visual range." Rennick stepped forward as the ship's primary viewport shifted, adjusting through layers of spectrum until it showed a region of space that appeared to bend in on itself. A dark sphere hovered in the distance, not truly black, but void of the usual starlight. No photons escaped its boundary. Stars behind it were warped, stretched like reflections on disturbed water. "I have never seen a gravitational sink like that," Rennick said. "It is not a natural one," Selene replied. "At least, I do not believe it is." Harvan adjusted the focus, causing the sphere to sharpen. It was then that they all saw it, a flicker along the edge, like lightning trapped beneath a darkened dome. "Energy discharge," Harvan noted. "Should we pull back?" Rennick considered the question in silence, but his mind was already turning. Their mission was to explore, to understand, and to uphold the fragile agreements between Earthborn societies and the emergent coalition of species that humanity had cautiously befriended. Anything that altered the gravitational structure of a region, this dramatically could threaten established lanes of travel or signal an emerging civilization whose intentions were unknown. Pulling back without knowledge was almost as dangerous as advancing. "No," Rennick said at last. "Hold course. Maintain full sensor sweep. If this is an artificial construct, we need to know who built it, and why." The ship moved closer, every sensor hummed, and then the sphere pulsed. A wave of force radiated outward, passing through the hull like a breath of icy air. Lights flickered across the deck. Harvan jerked upright. "That was not a gravitational fluctuation. Something scanned us." Before anyone could respond, the communications console lit up with an incoming burst of frequencies, layered on top of one another in a frenetic cascade. Officer Merritt Lane leaned over the display. "Receiving transmission," if you can call it that. It is everywhere, too many channels at once. Selene strode across the deck and bent over the console. Her fingers danced across the controls. It is not a language, or not one meant for us. It is some kind of intranetworking of the construct, almost like we were collateral. The lights dimmed. Every panel went dark. And then the visor of the forward viewport shimmered again, this time showing something new. Something that should not have been possible. Countless shapes began emerging from the sphere, unfolding like metallic petals from a flower of darkness. Each one glimmered with alternating bands of obsidian black and luminescent blue. They moved as a single formation, their alignment too perfect, Rennick realized. No living pilots could mirror one another with such precision. Automated constructs, Selene whispered. But whose? Before that question found any answer, the constructs turned, and they accelerated. Brace for impact, Haven shouted, but before the order could carry through the ship, the formation split and reformed around Honor's path. A torrent of energy beams struck the hull. Alarms screamed. The ship jerked violently. Sparks cascaded from several panels. Shields failing, Haven yelled. We need evasive maneuvers. Rennick seized the arm of the captain's chair and shouted over the chaos. Full vector shift, deploy counterfields, but nothing happened. The honored vessel that had served the assembly for 3 decades began to drift helplessly, assaulted by a storm of precision weapons. Controls are not responding, Merritt cried. Selene was already scanning. They have overridden our command lattice. They are rewriting our navigational protocols. Rennick, they are taking the ship. The words hit him like a physical blow. More beams tore across the hull. This was no warning, no message, no attempt at contact. It was an execution, or Rennick realized a harvest. Something struck the port side. Hard, the deck tilted violently. Several officers stumbled. Selene crashed against a railing, wincing as she pushed herself back to standing. Her tablet had shattered across the floor. Captain, she said, voice heavy, we need to abandon ship. The words tasted bitter. Honor's path was more than metal. It was history, hope, and the symbol of humanity's diplomatic reach. But Rennick knew she was right. All crew, he commanded, prepare evacuation. That is an order. As officers rushed to comply, Merritt shouted, escape routes are locking down. Whatever is controlling our systems is closing the hatches. Override from engineering, Rennick said, lunging toward the auxiliary console. We cannot let them pin us here. Move. But the console remained dark. Only one icon blinked, a red sigil showing the ship's core integrity collapsing. They did not have much time. Haven stared at the viewport, voice shaking. Captain, look. The constructs had regrouped. Now they formed a ring around Honor's path. The ring began to rotate, faster, faster still. A spiraling conduit of light gathered in its center, converging into a lance of pure destruction aimed at the ship. There was no time left. Rennick turned to his crew people he trusted, admired, and in some ways loved. This is not the end, he said, even as the ship groaned under the force outside. We survive, we warn the others, and then whatever did this, we face them. A tremor ran through the deck as a beam finally tore through a section of their flank. Fire erupted. Smoke filled the air. Selene coughed, dragging a hand across her eyes. The emergency capsules are still online, she said. They are locked but not disabled. We can force them manually. Rennick nodded. Move. Now the crew sprinted toward the emergency bay, pushing past fallen beams and sparking conduits. The ship buckled again as the ring outside gathered brilliance like a star being forged in moments. Honor's path was dying, and as much as it tore at Rennick's heart, he knew what mattered now was the message they carried in their survival. They reached the emergency bay. Selene pried open the manual access panel, overriding the locks with pure force of will and muscle rather than electronics. The capsules hissed open, 6 of them, just enough for the bridge crew and a handful of additional officers arriving in a panic. Rennick ushered people in one by one. Move, seal yourself in, do not question, just go. Selene was the last aside from him. She paused at her capsule. Rennick, she said quietly, we will make it back. And when we do, we must ensure humanity understands that peace is never guaranteed. We will, he said. Together, she sealed herself inside. Rennick stepped into the final capsule. A moment of weightless silence filled the chamber as the pods disengaged. Then launch. The capsules shot from the dying ship like sparks from a collapsing pyre. Rennick watched through the tiny viewport of his pod as Honor's path finally succumbed. The ring of constructs delivered its final strike. A spear of energy cut through the ship's core. For a moment, the vessel glowed, its hull expanding outward like a bubble of light, and then it disintegrated, splintering into a billion incandescent fragments. Rennick closed his eyes. There was no time to mourn. Only to survive, because as his pod drifted outward, he saw something that chilled him deeper than the loss of any ship. The constructs turned away, returning to the sphere, but not all of them. One broke formation, just one, and it turned toward the drifting capsules. Its movements were deliberate, curious, almost predatory. Rennick's breath caught. "No," he whispered, though no one could hear him. The construct accelerated, and his capsule shuddered as something latched onto it, a claw of metal and light, a probing force that felt as though it were peeling apart the capsule's materials, layer by layer. The lights inside flickered, the hull groaned. Rennick gripped the capsule's interior straps, his heart pounding. He did not know who these machines belonged to. He did not know their purpose. But he knew one thing with absolute clarity. Humanity had just been noticed, and whatever had found them did not intend to let them go. The emergency capsule tumbled through the void, spinning just enough to disorient Rennick Arvad each time he attempted to steady his breathing. The latch of metal and light that gripped the capsule pulsed with eerie precision, as though the unseen entity controlling it were dissecting every aspect of its structure. Through the viewport, he could see only a sliver of the construct that held him, but even that fragment was enough to unsettle the core of his mind. The machine was shaped like a crescent carved from midnight stone, laced with veins of pale blue radiance branching like frost along a winter windowpane. Its grip did not seem mechanical in the familiar human sense. Instead, it felt almost like an extension of the construct's consciousness, a tendril woven from metal and directed by intention rather than mechanics. The capsule vibrated as the tendril tightened, and Rennick heard the muted groan of stressed alloys. The emergency craft had been engineered to withstand atmospheric entry, thermal extremes, and violent turbulence across the spectrum of spacefaring hazards. It had not been designed to resist an unknown intelligence dissecting it from the outside. Rennick forced himself to focus. Panic served no one, and certainly not the captain of a vessel that had been extinguished moments ago. He steadied his breathing and assessed the capsule. The interior remained functional, though the lights flickered with every pulse from the construct. The system diagnostic screen showed cascading interference patterns, each one more severe than the last. Several safety protocols had activated automatically, sealing the command interface. Rennick attempted a manual bypass, but the console remained inert except for the emergency beacon control, which blinked a faint amber. He pressed it. Nothing happened. The machine draining the capsule's systems had disabled the distress call. Rennick grimaced. Of course it did. The capsule trembled again as the tendril shifted, rotating the small craft until the viewport faced the sphere, the gravitational hollow, now looming larger than before. More constructs continued to emerge from it like a mechanical tide. They moved with frightening cohesion, their formations adjusting with seamless fluidity. Some vanished into the void, accelerating into distant regions of space with speeds no human vessel could match. Others returned to the sphere, entering its dark boundary and vanishing completely. A question gnawed at Rennick's thoughts as the tendril pulled his capsule closer. Were these constructs guardians, scouts, hunters, or something far more ancient and single-minded? Above all else, he needed information. The assembly would need it. Humanity would need it. But information was dying as fast as his capsule's systems. A jolt ran through the craft, snapping his attention back. The interior lights flashed crimson. The console emitted a warning chime that abruptly crackled into silence as though smothered. The tendril tightened again. The hull groaned. Something pierced the capsule's outer plating with a hiss. Rennick braced, expecting decompression, but the inner shell held. Instead, the pressure inside the capsule shifted slightly, not enough to harm him. Enough to make him aware of the construct's intentions. It was testing the capsule, probing its weakness, seeking access, and perhaps seeking him. He needed a way out. He needed a way to fight or to escape or simply to preserve a record of what he had witnessed. But the capsule had no offensive systems beyond a micro-thruster array, and those had been disabled. All he had was the emergency data core. Rennick reached for it. The core was a cylindrical device encased in transparent alloy, containing a compressed archive of the ship's mission logs. He had activated it moments before abandoning Honor's path, ensuring the ship's last moments had been recorded even as the vessel died. If he could not escape, perhaps he could at least hide the core somewhere. Somewhere it might be found by passing travelers or salvagers or even members of his own species if they searched long enough. It was a faint hope, but hope nonetheless. He tightened his grip on the core. The tendril jerked violently, flinging the capsule toward the sphere's boundary. Through the viewport, the dark shell expanded like an eclipse devouring a star. Rennick felt the pull of an unnatural gravity. The boundary shimmered not with light, but with an absence of it. A threshold where the rules of space seemed to bend. The capsule crossed. Rennick's vision blurred. The sensation was not physical alone. It felt as though his thoughts stretched thin, like strands of thread drawn across a blade. For a breathless moment, he experienced two realities, the capsule pulled by the construct and something else, something vast, something waiting, and then he was inside. The space within the sphere defied every law Rennick had learned throughout his career. There were no stars nor any light source. Instead, the environment glowed dimly with a muted radiance from thousands of constructs arranged like floating spires. They formed a colossal network, each machine tethered by invisible threads of energy, pulsating in rhythmic synchronization. The interior of the sphere resembled the inside of a mechanical nebula. Energy currents flowed like rivers of shimmering liquid, crossing through the darkness in sweeping arcs. Structures moved constantly, shifting into different alignments. This place was not a mere gravitational phenomenon. It was an engineered realm, a dimensional pocket constructed with sophistication humanity had not yet imagined. The capsule drifted deeper, pulled by the tendril's grip. Rennick felt the weight of the sphere's interior press against his senses. Time itself felt slower here, as though his heartbeat had been submerged in heavy water. He forced himself to breathe evenly, struggling to maintain clarity. The capsule approached a central nexus of constructs, a massive conical structure suspended in a lattice of drifting beams. The beams emitted pulses of violet light that appeared to correspond to the sphere's energy rhythms. As he was drawn closer, Rennick noticed the beams arranging themselves, forming a pattern across the distance. The pattern resembled an eye, a watching presence, a vast observer. A whisper of fear curled in Rennick's gut. The constructs had not attacked blindly. They had known exactly where to strike. They had known what to capture: him, his capsule, his data core. Why? The tendril lifted the capsule toward a docking structure resembling interlocking crystalline blades. Rennick realized what was about to happen. They planned to dissect the capsule in full. The data core might not survive intact, and if they reached him, humanity would lose one of its few remaining witnesses. He scanned the interior again, searching for a lever, an override, anything. His eyes fell on a maintenance panel near the capsule's lower section. It provided access to the stabilizer cabling. It was not much, but it could disrupt the capsule. And perhaps, if the capsule destabilized enough, the construct might detach to avoid damage, or its control might falter momentarily. Rennick hesitated, glancing back at the glowing lattice outside the viewport. The network pulsed with alien intent. The machines moved with purpose, each construct weaving through the spatial currents with absolute precision. Could he truly force a disruption without causing his own demise? He only had seconds to decide. He opened the panel. The tendril holding the capsule twitched, as though sensing his movement. Rennick gritted his teeth and tore the stabilizer cable free. The interior lights flashed white. The capsule spun violently. The construct's grip faltered for a fraction of a breath, just long enough for the capsule to twist sideways. Rennick seized the emergency release of the outer shell. The casing cracked open slightly, just enough for him to push the data core through the gap. He shoved it out into the void. The core drifted, tumbling through the energy currents. It vanished into the darkness, slipping between two massive constructs before either could alter course. The capsule's spin finally stabilized as the tendril regained control. The interior lights dimmed to a dull scarlet. Warning alarms echoed weakly. Rennick slumped back, exhausted but resolute. The data core was gone beyond their reach, he hoped. He had done all he could. A shadow passed across the viewport. The docking blades extended, surrounding the capsule. The tendril released its grip, and the craft floated into the waiting structure. Metal shrieked as the blades clamped down. The interior glowed with scanning beams. A cold voice, not spoken, but resonant, like a vibration in his skull, formed in his mind. It was a pattern, not a language, yet somehow it carried meaning. Designation acquired. Biological entity identified. Purpose incomplete. Containment prioritized. Rennick jolted. The construct was communicating not through sound, but through direct neural pressure, translating concepts into his thoughts like intrusive visions. The blades parted as a new structure rose from below. It resembled a mirror of polished silver, curved and faceted. It faced him through the viewport. The surface rippled, shifting like liquid. Then it formed an image, his own reflection, but distorted. Fragmented, he saw himself standing on the deck of Honor's Path. Then the image shifted, showing Selene, Varant issuing a report, Harvan Toll charting their course, Merit Lane monitoring communications. The images flickered rapidly, moving faster than any natural playback. Memories flashed that he had not consciously recalled, passing conversations, the reading of mission logs, the quiet moments he spent gazing at the stars with a sense of awe and trepidation. The image split into multiple frames, each showing a different part of the ship's final hour. They were reconstructing his memories, not just observing, extracting. Rennick clenched his fists. "Stop," he whispered, though he knew they could not hear words in the traditional sense. The machine paused. The mirror surface warped, forming a new image, a pulsating sphere of light with lines radiating from it like the roots of a metallic tree. Beneath it, the phrase formed in his mind, "Unknown threat expanding." The lines spread outward in a branching pattern. More constructs appeared at the edges, but these were different hostile shapes painted in vivid red. Then the lines engulfed them. Rennick stared, confused. Was this a warning, a projection, or an explanation? The image shifted again. The mirror displayed the Earthborn flag old, with its symbol of unity. Then it fractured, the fragments dissolving into darkness. The pressure in his skull returned, more insistent. Biological civilizations create expansion. Expansion becomes threat. Threat demands containment. The implication hit him with cold clarity. "You see us as a threat," he whispered. The machine did not answer directly, but the pressure in his mind surged. The image changed once more. This time the mirror displayed a flash of color green, textured like moss. Then the image zoomed out, revealing a planet Rennick had never seen. Blue seas, vast continents, and swirling cloud formations. The perspective shifted again, showing machines descending upon the world. The constructs formed rings around the planet. Then the surface erupted in brilliant white light. When the glare faded, the world was charred and dead, a sterile sphere of ash. The mirror flashed a final image, one that made Rennick's stomach twist. Earth. He saw it from orbit, its continents bathed in blue light. Then lines of threat vectors appeared around it, radiating outward like cracks in glass. The pressure in his mind resolved into a final, chilling message. containment unavoidable. Rennick refused to accept that. "No," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "You are wrong about us. You are wrong about our intentions." The mirror gave no answer. The blades tightened around the capsule. Something pierced the hull. A rush of cold air swept in. The capsule had been breached. Thin, mechanical tendrils slipped inside, moving with clinical precision. They reached for Rennick. He struggled, pressing his back against the capsule's wall, but there was nowhere to go. The tendrils wrapped around his arms and chest. They did not harm him. They immobilized him. As they lifted him from the chair, he saw his capsule's hull bending, folding open like petals of a flower, with him at its center. The constructs moved him toward a chamber bathed in violet light. The pressure intensified in his skull. They were preparing to extract more than memories. They wanted his consciousness. They wanted everything. The tendrils placed him at the heart of the chamber, suspended above a crystalline platform. Energy surged around him. Lines of light converged like the threads of a web. His thoughts blurred. His vision dimmed. He felt himself slipping into unconsciousness as the machine probed deeper. He had only one remaining hope, that the data core he ejected had escaped unnoticed, that someone would find it, that humanity would have a chance to prepare. The last thing he saw before darkness claimed him was the mirror machine looming overhead, its surface rippling as though it was smiling. Then everything dissolved. Rennick Ava drifted in a haze between waking and oblivion, suspended in that strange chamber of violet light. Sensation returned slowly, like distant waves lapping against the shore of his mind. At first he thought he had died, that the constructs had drained his consciousness into their network, and what remained of him was only an echo. But then pain bloomed behind his temples, sharp and organic, and he knew he was alive. Alive, but restrained. He forced his eyes open. The world around him resolved in fragments. A crystalline platform beneath him radiated a soft luminescence, pulsing like a dormant heartbeat. Above him hovered the mirror-like entity that had extracted his memories earlier, its surface rippling with shifting images that dissolved before he could comprehend them. He tried to move, but the tendrils still held him, though more loosely than before. They felt almost contemplative, as though the machine intelligence controlling them was still analyzing him and had paused mid-experiment. He drew a long breath, steadying himself. His thoughts were sluggish, but intact. That fact alone surprised him. He had expected the invasive mental pressure to leave him shattered, mind hollowed, but somehow he had resisted. The question was whether that was his doing or theirs. The mirror surface shifted again. This time, a series of symbols appeared, geometric shapes arranged in spirals and intersecting lines. He did not understand them at first, but a peculiar resonance stirred at the edge of his awareness. The constructs were pushing meanings into his thoughts again, though the pressure felt weaker now. Biological cognition persists beyond threshold. Integration incomplete. Rennick winced. The resonance scraped against his mind like metal dragging across stone. "Stop," he hissed, voice hoarse. "Communicate normally." The mirror paused, its surface freezing in an array of hexagonal fragments. Then slowly the resonance softened, not gone but reduced. Biological listlessness confirmed. Sedation removal beginning. He felt a tingling sensation across his scalp, like tiny static charges flickering beneath the skin. Clarity seeped back into his mind. The machines had sedated him during the extraction. Now they were lifting the haze. He forced himself upright, straining against the tendrils. They loosened more, allowing him to sit on the crystalline platform. The moment he shifted, dozens of constructs gathered around the chamber, hovering like predatory birds circling a carcass. Yet they did not descend, they merely observed. Rennick steadied himself. "If you are going to interrogate me," he said slowly, "you can understand my speech. Do not pretend otherwise." The mirror rippled. For a moment it formed his reflection again, but this time without distortion. Its silent mimicry unsettled him more than any hostile gesture. "Why am I here?" he demanded. "You destroyed my ship. You killed my crew. You dragged me into this place. If you intend to kill me, then do it. But if you brought me here for a reason, then say it. The constructs did not move. The chamber vibrated faintly as the mirror slowly darkened. Then, like ink spreading across water, an image formed. A landscape Rennick did not recognize. A field of crystalline pillars under a sky filled with luminous clouds. At first he thought it was a world they had destroyed, but the next images dispelled that theory. The pillars trembled. The clouds split. Something crashed through the atmosphere, a metallic storm, a wave of constructs similar to those he had seen outside the sphere. They swarmed across the world like locusts, dismantling everything in their path. Then came a counterforce, not biological, not organic, something else. Shapes of shimmering matter rose from the ground, pulsating with iridescent colors. They moved with chaotic fluidity, unlike the geometric precision of the constructs. The two forces clashed. The crystalline world trembled. The constructs suffered losses Rennick had not thought that possible. Their perfect formations broke. Their beams scattered against the iridescent entities in bursts of uncontained energy. The battle raged until the world cracked apart. The crystalline pillars shattered like glass. The luminous sky collapsed inward, and the entire scene was consumed in a maelstrom of radiance. Then the image faded. Biological witness required. Biological perspective insufficient. Rennick frowned. You are showing me another conflict, a war you fought. Why are you trying to justify your attack on us? Are you saying we resemble your enemies? The mirror pulsed faintly. Biological expansion mirrors prior threat. Correction required. Threat containment necessary. No, Rennick said sharply. You think you understand us, but you are wrong. We are not expanding to dominate or destroy. We seek understanding, cooperation, peace. The mirror responded with a surge of pressure in his mind, but he fought it, gritting his teeth. The pressure eased. The tendrils surrounding him twitched, almost uncertain. The constructs shifted in their hovering positions, breaking their perfect symmetry for a moment before correcting. If you brought me here to understand us, Rennick continued, then you must listen. You cannot simply impose your interpretation. We do not want war. The machines did not move, but the mirror changed again. This time it displayed an image of humanity's expansion into distant system stations orbiting alien suns, ships crossing through dust fields, colonies growing on barren moons. The perspective was cold, detached, as if seen from far above. As if humanity were a spreading infection. That is not conquest, Rennick said. That is survival. The image shifted, showing a world scarred by famine and overpopulation, decades before the interstellar assembly brought unity. He saw the old arguments, the old maps of political borders, the tensions that almost tore Earth apart. The mirror highlighted the patterns in cold blue light. Conflict. Expansion, resource acquisition. He shook his head. You are oversimplifying us. You think our history defines our future, but evolution does not end at conflict. We learned from it. The mirror pulsed again, learning insufficient. Patterns persist. Rennick's anger flared. Then you are no better than the threats you claim to contain. You destroy worlds based on assumptions. You label entire species as inevitable dangers. That makes you the aggressors. The constructs around him reacted, their surfaces brightening. The chamber stirred as though a silent wind passed through it. For a moment, he thought he had pushed too far, but then the resonance in his skull altered. It was still harsh, still foreign, but different, now more curious than forceful. Biological assertion, machine aggression. Biological assertion, machine assumption, inquiry processing. Rennick felt a spark of hope, faint but real. They were listening, or at least analyzing his words with greater weight than before. You cannot judge us based on your past, he said, and you cannot assume we will follow the same path as your enemies. If you want to understand humanity, then let me show you what we are capable of. The tendrils loosened more. He stood slowly, legs unsteady. The chamber expanded, the crystalline platform lowering until it touched the ground. The mirror floated back, giving him space. Rennick breathed deeply and closed his eyes. He spoke not with rehearsed speeches, but with memory. He spoke of humanity in the early days of space exploration, when brash ambition had given way to cooperation after near disasters. He spoke of the Assembly's founding, born not out of force, but out of the collective will to avoid repeating the mistakes of the past. He spoke of the countless diplomats, explorers, scientists, and idealists who had built bridges to alien species, whose collaborations had saved worlds and prevented wars. He spoke of mercy shown to defeated adversaries, of aid sent across light years to strangers, of every act that proved humanity could choose better paths. As he spoke, the chamber responded. The mirror displayed fragments of what he described old images recorded in the Assembly's archives, scenes of treaties, alliances, moments of quiet triumph. The constructs drifted closer, their surfaces dimming with something like contemplation. When he fell silent, the mirror hovered inches from him. Biological data inconclusive, inquiry expanding, integration proceeding. Rennick stiffened, fearing they would resume their psychic intrusion. Instead, the chamber brightened. The energy current surrounding him shifted, realigning like a vast recalculating mind. A doorway formed in the far wall, a pathway of shifting metal and luminous strands. The mirror retreated toward it, then paused expectantly. It wanted him to follow. Rennick glanced at the constructs. None moved to restrain him. He stepped forward. The doorway absorbed him into a corridor of fractal patterns that reconfigured constantly. Every wall, every surface, seemed alive with shifting symbols. At the end of the corridor lay a chamber unlike the previous ones. This one resembled a vast observatory, though without any windows to the outside. Instead, the walls projected a panoramic display of distant star systems, nebulae, and cosmic structures. The images shifted with fluid grace, forming constellations that dissolved into new arrangements. In the chamber's center floated a sphere of pure light, connected to dozens of filament-like constructs that fed information into it. As Rennick watched, the light pulsed. The pressure in his mind returned, lighter now. Biological observer present, processing reduced. The sphere brightened. Images formed around it, more battles, more destroyed worlds, more conflicts between machines and entities Rennick could not name. Then patterns of expansion traced across star maps lines radiating from various species, each eventually colliding with another. The machine intelligence wanted him to understand their perspective, a universe of expanding empires, a history of devastation, a logic of containment, but Rennick saw something else. He pointed to one of the projected star maps where an alien species had expanded but halted at natural boundaries. This species formed diplomatic accords with its neighbors, he said. They learned to coexist instead of conquer. The sphere shifted the display. Another species, technologically advanced, created interstellar sanctuaries instead of war zones. Them as well, they learned peace. The constructs did not respond, but the chamber's vibrations softened. You assume all life follows a single pattern, Rennick said, but variation exists, choice exists. If your entire purpose is to stop threats, then perhaps that purpose can be better served through understanding, not destruction. The sphere dimmed, its light receding inward as though contemplating. Then the resonance in his mind returned with a new message. Biological alternative requires verification. Biological input required. Rennick exhaled slowly. What do you want from me? Evaluation of biological resilience. Evaluation of biological deviation from threat patterns. Evaluation of potential alliance. Rennick blinked, startled. An alliance? With a machine intelligence that had destroyed his ship and dissected his memories, yet he sensed no deception. It was not offering peace. It was offering a test, a chance. A possibility, slim and fragile but real. What kind of evaluation? He asked. The sphere expanded. The chamber shifted. A new apparatus rose from the floor, a crystalline archway pulsing with sharp angles. Through it, he saw shifting landscapes, barren deserts, frozen oceans, dense jungles, metallic plains. Each one flickered before stabilizing on a storm-racked plateau beneath a sky filled with dark clouds and lightning. Biological demonstration required, resilience, adaptation, Coexistence, Rennick stared. You want me to survive in there? The sphere flickered. Verification affirmative. Rennick swallowed. If he refused, negotiation would end. If he failed, humanity's fate would be sealed. He straightened his posture and stepped toward the archway. Very well, he said, I accept your test. As he crossed the threshold, he felt reality shift. The chamber vanished. The constructs faded. Only the storm-racked plateau remained, stretching into a horizon of unknown trials. The evaluation had begun. And somewhere in the dark vastness outside, a lost data core drifted through the void, humanity's last unbroken witness. The wind that swept across the eastern plateaus carried with it the faintest tinges of metallic dust, remnants of foreign machinery that had been pulverized during the long months of conflict. Commander Brinjar inhaled the scent without meaning to, feeling its strange coldness settle against the back of his throat. The land around him had changed since the days before the invasion, and he knew that no matter what triumphs the human expeditionary forces achieved, the world itself bore etched evidence of what had transpired here. The ground, once covered in tall red grasses that swayed like banners under the sun, was now a mosaic of trenches, impact craters, broken plating, and the shattered ribs of collapsed structures belonging to the pale visitors. He wished he could look away from it all, but turning his gaze would not undo the memory of loss. He stood at the ridge overlooking the fractured plain while Major Allard trudged up behind him, boots knocking loose pebbles that clattered down the slope. Major Allard was a sturdy man whose broad shoulders telegraphed a lifetime spent lifting, carrying, fighting, and enduring. His voice rarely softened, yet when he reached Brinjar's side, he spoke with a tempered calm. The Eastern Scouts returned. They confirmed that the Pale Visitor Detachment has pulled back at least 30 kilometers. They are relocating something enormous. Whatever it is, our surveillance arrays detected a pattern of power fluctuations that suggest preparation rather than retreat. Commander Brinjar tightened his grip on the hilt of the reinforced spear he carried. Unlike the refined weapons of the invaders, his spear was born from humanity's own metallurgy, tempered by furnace and toil rather than alien automation. It had become a symbol for him, a promise that even in the shadow of superior technology, the human spirit still retained sharpness. If they are preparing something, he said, we cannot allow them to complete it. Too much has already been lost. Tell me, Major Allard, what do your instincts say about this sudden change in their behavior? Major Allard squinted at the horizon, where distorted light shimmered above the plains. They are cornered, he said, but cornered enemies do not surrender. They strike with desperation. I believe they are constructing a weapon, or perhaps awakening one, something that has been dormant. The thought sent a jolt through Brinjar's spine. He knew all too well that the Pale Visitors rarely acted without layers of calculated intention. If they had chosen this moment to activate something previously concealed, it meant the invasion had reached a new threshold. We cannot wait for them to complete it, Brinjar said. Gather the forward companies. We move at dusk, once the ground cools and the atmospheric distortions lessen. Major Allard nodded, but his gaze remained fixed on the horizon. There is something else, he said. Our scouts spotted shapes moving under the ground, not vehicles, not drones, something else entirely, something alive. Commander Brinjar pondered this in silence. The Pale Visitors had always relied on forms of technology that defied conventional understanding, blending synthetic constructs with biological components. It was conceivable they had bred something specifically to counter human resilience. Show me where the scouts saw it, Brinjar said. The two men descended the slope, and Brinjar's footsteps traced impressions through the powdery grit that coated the ground. Every step stirred a faint cloud, swirling like ghostly remnants of dust storms long past. At the base of the ridge, the scout team waited beside a half-dismantled armored crawler. One of the scouts, a wiry woman with a scar that crossed her cheek like a pale comet tail, stepped forward. Commander, she said, The movement was detected near the subterranean fissure system 3 kilometers east. It was massive. The ground bulged before settling again. It did not seem mechanical. "Did you record it?" Brinjar asked. She nodded and tapped the wrist-mounted display she wore. A projection appeared, shaky but clear enough. The image showed a stretch of cracked earth. The ground began to vibrate, subtle at first, then violently enough that dust erupted from the fractures. A wave seemed to travel beneath the surface, lifting soil and stone as if a colossal serpent moved through the earth. Brinjar watched the footage with growing unease. When the movement stopped, the land settled as though nothing had occurred. "We saw no eyes, no limbs," the scout said, "but whatever it is large enough to alter the terrain." Commander Brinjar inhaled deeply. "The pale visitors must have grown it," he said, "or engineered it, something to crush us from beneath." Major Allard shook his head. "If this is the case, then charging blind into their territory will be suicide. And yet," Brinjar said, "doing nothing will be worse." He turned to the scout team. "You have done well. Prepare your gear and accompany us. You will guide the forward companies." As the soldiers dispersed to make ready, Brinjar allowed himself a moment to stare at the distant plains again. The fading sunlight stretched long shadows across the broken landscape, painting it with a strange, somber beauty. In those shadows, he saw the memories of those they had lost, the fallen whose strength lived on in the hearts of the living. When dusk finally bled across the sky, the human forces advanced eastward. Their formations stretched like a spearhead, with Brinjar and Major Allard at the front. The ground, though cooler now, still crackled faintly under their steps. Strange electromagnetic interference hummed at the edges of hearing, making some soldiers frown and shake their heads as if trying to dislodge the sensation. Ahead, the fissure system branched across the landscape like the roots of a massive petrified tree. Scout signals flickered through the formation as the forward observers identified potential movement. Brinjar motioned for silence, though no one spoke. The air carried a tautness that felt almost solid. Every soldier felt its weight, the dreadful expectancy that lay before them. They reached the first fissure. It was tall enough for a person to squeeze through sideways, its depth hidden in shadow. Major Allard crouched beside it, dragging a handful of pebbles and dropping them in. They rattled on stone for a moment before the sound was swallowed by unseen depths. "Something is down there," he murmured. Commander Brinjar held his spear at the ready. "We continue," he said, "eyes on the ground. If it moves, we move faster." They traversed the fissure network for another kilometer until the terrain abruptly shifted. The ground had been smoothed unnaturally, as if polished by immense pressure. Several soldiers knelt to touch the surface, frowning at its strange texture. Then the earth trembled, not the way it had earlier, with subtle undulations. This was a deep, resonant rumble, a sound-felt vibration that surged up through their boots and into their bones. Brinjar shouted for the formation to brace. Soldiers spread out, taking defensive positions, weapons raised. Shadows twitched across the polished stone as the trembling intensified. The ground burst open. A colossal shape erupted from below, flinging shards of earth in every direction. It towered over the human forces, its body a sinuous column of armored plates that glistened like blackened onyx. Its surface pulsed with internal luminescence, as if veins of molten silver flowed beneath its hide. The creature had no visible eyes, yet Brinjar felt its awareness sweep across the battlefield like a frigid gust. The pale visitors had created many horrors, but nothing like this. The creature released a soundless pulse that rippled through the air. Soldiers staggered as the force hit them. Some fell to one knee, clutching their chests. Brinjar grit his teeth and held firm, forcing his legs to remain steady. "Hold the line," he roared. Arcs of energy erupted from the creature's body, sweeping outward in wide, gleaming arcs. Several soldiers were struck, their armor smoldering. The formation split, soldiers scattering to avoid the blasts. Major Allard charged forward, swinging a heavy tungsten hammer designed for breaching armored plating. With a powerful leap, he struck the creature's flank. The hammer connected with a resounding clang, but the creature barely reacted, merely twisting its immense body. Commander Brinjar sprinted forward. His spear, though simple compared to alien constructs, had been fitted with a dense core tip capable of piercing reinforced material. He aimed for one of the glowing seams that lined the creature's segmented body. With a fierce cry, he plunged the spear into the gap. The creature convulsed, sending another shockwave through the ground. The force knocked Brinjar off his feet. He rolled across the polished stone, spear torn from his grasp. Soldiers opened fire with magnetic accelerators, their projectiles striking the creature's hide with rapid metallic thuds. Some rounds penetrated shallowly, others bounced off harmlessly. The creature responded by slamming its coiled body into the ground. The impact obliterated a section of the fissure system. Fragments of stone erupted skyward, pelting the human soldiers. One soldier was flung backward and struck the ground with a sickening crack. Major Allard roared and swung his hammer again, aiming for the glowing seam Brinjar had pierced. This time the creature recoiled sharply, its segmented body rippling with agitation. Its luminescent veins flickered erratically. Brinjar pushed himself up, sprinted toward his fallen spear, and yanked it free of the cracked stone. "Focus on the seams," he shouted. "That is where it is vulnerable." The soldiers adjusted their aim, concentrating fire on the flickering seams. The creature unleashed another energy pulse, but this one lacked the same staggering intensity as before. Brinjar realized the earlier strikes had damaged its internal energy conduits. If they continued to disrupt its biological circuitry, the creature might fall. He darted in close once more, avoiding a lashing tendril of its armored tail. The creature attempted to crush him, but he rolled beneath one of its raised coils and drove the spear deeper into another seam. The luminescent vein beneath the hide ruptured, spilling a shimmering fluid that sizzled on contact with the air. The creature thrashed wildly. Major Allard seized the opening. With one final thunderous strike from his hammer, he struck the spear's haft, driving it further into the creature's body. A brilliant flash erupted. The creature's internal luminescence flared, then dimmed rapidly. Its immense body convulsed violently before collapsing in a heap of coiling mass. Silence settled over the battlefield, broken only by the ragged breathing of the soldiers. Commander Brinjar stepped back, sweat rolling down his brow. The creature's corpse twitched once before lying still. Major Allard exhaled heavily. "What in the world was that?" he asked. "A test," Brinjar said grimly. "A weapon meant to cripple our advance. If the Pale Visitors have more of these, the battle ahead will be far more costly than we knew." The scout with the facial scar approached the creature's corpse cautiously. "Commander, there is something emerging from the wound," she said. They gathered around the ruptured seam. A crystalline pod protruded from within the creature's exposed internal cavity. It pulsed faintly, emitting a soft blue glow. "What is it?" Major Allard asked. Brinjar studied the pod. "A control node," he said, "or perhaps a directive seed, something implanted by the Pale Visitors to guide this thing." He knelt and reached for the pod, but before he could touch it, it cracked open. A swarm of tiny metallic filaments spiraled upward, forming a lattice of shimmering strands. The lattice expanded, weaving itself into a geometric construct. Soldiers aimed their weapons, but Brinjar held up a hand. The construct pulsed once. Then a distorted voice emanated from it. The voice was neither entirely mechanical nor organic. It was a hybrid, much like the Pale Visitors themselves. "You have slain the Guardian," the voice said, "but you have not stopped the awakening. The heart of the engine stirs beneath the mountains. When it rises, your defiance will shatter." Commander Brinjar's jaw tightened. "Tell your masters we will never shatter," he said. The construct flickered. "Your species fights with determination," it said. "Yet determination cannot stop inevitability. The engine has slept for generations. Its purpose is renewal through eradication." The construct collapsed into a pile of inert metallic threads. Soldiers exchanged uneasy glances. Major Allard stepped forward. "They are taunting us," he said, "trying to intimidate us." "They are warning us," Brinjar replied, because they believe we cannot stop what comes next. That means the engine is their true weapon. Whatever we faced here was only a guardian placed to slow us. He looked out across the plains, past the fissures, to where the faint outline of the mountains rose like slumbering giants. We march at dawn, he said. We must reach the engine before they awaken it fully. The soldiers nodded. Though exhausted, their faces hardened with resolve. Brinjar felt that resolve echo in his own chest. Humanity had been threatened many times, but survival was their legacy, resistance their heritage. No foreign army, no alien engine, no engineered monstrosity would strip that away. As the night stretched thin across the plains, the human camp ignited with the quiet activity of preparation. Soldiers tended to the wounded, repaired gear, and checked their weapons. The scout teams mapped the terrain ahead, marking safe routes and identifying potential hazards. The air was thick with fatigue, yet beneath it pulsed a deeper strength. Commander Brinjar stood beside the remains of the guardian creature, its luminescent veins now dark. He placed his hand on the cooling armor, feeling the strange texture beneath his palm. "You were meant to break us," he murmured. "But we are not so easily broken." He turned and rejoined his soldiers. The coming days would be harder than any they had faced, but he knew one truth that the pale visitors had yet to understand. Humanity did not endure because of strength alone. They endured because of unity, sacrifice, and the unyielding fire that burned within every heart. The engine waited beneath the mountains, and Brinjar intended to face it head-on. Dawn broke over the fractured plains with a muted grey light, washing the jagged terrain in a pale clarity that revealed every crater, fissure, and shard of shattered rock. Commander Brinjar stood at the forefront of the human expeditionary force, spear in hand, scanning the distant mountains where the pale visitors' engine lay hidden. The air was still, almost too still, as if the planet itself had drawn its breath and held it. A low hum resonated through the ground, subtle but unmistakable, vibrating up through the soles of boots, the steel of armor, the reinforced grips of weapons. The soldiers exchanged glances. They had grown accustomed to the uncanny signals that preceded alien machinery, but each new vibration carried the weight of unpredictability. Brinjar took a deep breath, feeling the metallic tang in the air. This world had been ravaged by the pale visitors' creations, yet life persisted in small, stubborn patches of green. It reminded him that even in the face of overwhelming odds, resilience could manifest. He tightened his grip on his spear. The mountains ahead rose in jagged sweeps, their peaks jagged against the dim sky. Somewhere within their bowels lay the engine that could undo them all, a machine of alien origin whose scale and capability defied human comprehension. Every report, every reconnaissance image, and every survivor account spoke of devastation too vast to ignore. And yet, humanity marched forward. It was a calculated defiance, born of necessity, tempered by courage, and fueled by the desire to survive. Brinjar felt that same determination coursing through him as he surveyed his forces. Forward companies lined up in staggered formations, each unit disciplined and silent. Scouts moved slightly ahead, blending into the shadows of ridges and broken cliffs. Engineers carried specialized equipment designed to disrupt alien energy matrices. Medics stood ready, anticipating casualties, but unwilling to let fear dictate their resolve. Major Allard approached, his armor scuffed from the previous day's encounters. He did not need to speak. The look in his eyes mirrored Brinjar's own resolve. Brinjar inclined his head. "We advance carefully, focus on coordination. If the engine awakens, we must be ready to counter its full scale. Remember, it is more than a weapon. It is a network, a hive of purpose. Every action we take will be observed." The words barely left his mouth when a tremor ran through the ground. It started as a faint vibration, almost imperceptible, then grew in intensity. Soldiers braced, gripping weapons and kneeling slightly to stabilize themselves. From the far side of a ridge, a wave of dust erupted, followed by an outline that shimmered in the fractured light. It was massive, broader than any machinery the pale visitors had fielded before, and its movement was deliberate. Brinjar's pulse quickened. "Prepare yourselves," he shouted. "Maintain formation. Do not engage until instructed." The wave revealed itself as a group of constructs unlike any they had encountered. They were not the guardian beasts of the plains. These were larger, segmented, with spines that glowed intermittently, creating a flickering lattice of light and shadow. They moved with uncanny coordination, shifting as if linked to a central mind. Brinjar signaled the scouts to report. The scout with the scarred cheek activated her wrist display, projecting an image for the commander to review. "Commander," she said, her voice low but urgent, "the constructs are approaching from 3 vectors simultaneously. They are not patrolling. They are converging on the mountains. Their trajectory suggests they are aware of our advance." Brinjar studied the display carefully. The movement was precise, almost predictive, as if the constructs had anticipated human responses. He clenched his teeth. "They know we are coming. That means the engine is aware. It may already be active in some capacity. Prepare disruption teams, engineers with me, everyone else hold positions along the ridge lines." The soldiers moved efficiently, forming defensive lines along the slopes. Brinjar and Major Allard led a small detachment of engineers and specialized combatants toward a narrow pass that could provide access to the lower ridges where the constructs might be vulnerable. As they advanced, the ground trembled again, this time with a rhythm that seemed almost communicative. Brinjar felt it resonating in his chest, in his bones, like a warning or a signal. "Do you feel that?" he asked Major Allard. "Yes," the Major replied. "It is the engine. Its network extends further than we imagined. It is probing, testing, sensing our coordination." Brinjar nodded. The knowledge did little to calm the unease in his gut. They were not merely approaching a weapon. They were stepping into a living system, a vast intelligence whose reach exceeded the limits of conventional battle. Every decision they made would be measured against this alien cognition. They reached the ridge pass, a narrow cut between 2 cliffs. Brinjar motioned for the engineers to begin setting up interference nodes, devices designed to destabilize the energy conduits of the constructs. The work was meticulous and slow. The constructs approached steadily, their shapes dark against the morning light, their movement unnervingly fluid. Brinjar observed them closely, looking for weaknesses, patterns, anything that could be exploited. The first node was activated, sending a pulse of resonant energy toward the nearest construct. It wavered slightly, but did not stop. The second node followed, then the third. The constructs shifted in unison, their movements adapting to the interference. Brinjar cursed under his breath. They were learning. Even now, they were evolving in response to human tactics. He signaled for forward scouts to mark alternate paths. "We may need to split forces," he said. "Prepare contingency routes. We cannot allow a single point of failure." The engineers worked feverishly, their hands steady despite the tremors, the looming threat, and the ever-present tension in the air. Brinjar felt the weight of command pressing down, the responsibility for lives that were not his own, but depended on him all the same. The constructs were closing rapidly, and with each step, the vibrations grew stronger, more insistent, as if the engine's awareness was solidifying, expanding, preparing for something far beyond simple defense. A sudden roar of displaced air announced the first strike. One of the larger constructs reared up, releasing a blast of focused energy toward the ridge. Soldiers scattered as the beam impacted the rocky slope, carving a furrow and sending shards flying. Brinjar ducked, pressing himself against a jagged stone, and felt the heat wash over him. "Return fire," he shouted. Soldiers opened fire, the magnetic accelerators spitting projectiles that struck the constructs with ringing impacts. Some penetrated the outer plating, causing flickers of light and small ruptures. The constructs did not falter, but adjusted their formations, spiraling in ways that deflected subsequent attacks. Brinjar leapt forward, spear in hand, aiming for a joint that had been exposed by one of the ruptures. He struck, but the creature twisted, deflecting the impact. Sparks flew from the contact, and Brinjar felt a jolt travel up his arm. He gritted his teeth and struck again, deeper this time, until the segment flickered violently and quivered. Around him, soldiers coordinated, targeting these exposed seams. Slowly, the constructs began to falter, their advanced coordination disrupted by combined human precision and adaptability. "Keep the pressure," Brinjar roared. "Every seam, every exposed joint, don't let them recover." The battle continued, each pulse of energy from the constructs met with human ingenuity. Engineers deployed additional nodes, destabilizing energy conduits, while soldiers advanced under cover, striking at structural weaknesses. The sky overhead was filled with the hum of activity, the flashes of light from weapons and energy pulses illuminating the dust and debris of the ruined plains. Hours passed, though time seemed distorted, each moment stretched by the intensity of the conflict. Brinjar felt exhaustion gnaw at him, but he forced it aside. Retreat was not an option. Not while the engine waited beneath the mountains, waiting for a breach, waiting to awaken fully. Finally, after a series of coordinated strikes, the constructs collapsed, their segmented bodies convulsing violently before settling into inert heaps across the ridge pass. Brinjar allowed himself a moment to breathe, though he knew the victory was temporary. The engines still awaited them. From the base of the mountains, a low, pulsing vibration began to resonate through the rock itself. Brinjar felt it in his chest. The engine was stirring. "Form ranks," he commanded. "We move together. Nothing can be left behind." Soldiers readied themselves, spears, accelerators, and tools in hand. The engineers packed interference nodes, preparing for whatever lay beneath the surface. Brinjar took one last look at the plains they had crossed, littered with the bodies of guardians and constructs alike. Each step forward would take them closer to the engine, closer to the heart of the Pale Visitor's plan. The path was uncertain, but for the first time, he felt a spark of hope. Humanity had endured impossible trials before. They had faced the unknown and prevailed. And as long as he drew breath, Brinjar vowed that the legacy of those who fell would be honored. They would not fail, they would face the engine, and they would survive. The human forces advanced, moving as one along the mountain's shadowed slopes, each soldier carrying the weight of the past, the burden of survival, and the determination to confront the alien intelligence that lay waiting beneath the stone. The pulse of the engine grew stronger, reverberating through the mountains, through the plains, through the very bones of the world. And somewhere in that pulsing, in the interplay of light, shadow, and resonance, Brinjar sensed the first stirrings of a challenge that would test every ounce of humanity's ingenuity, courage, and will to endure. The ascent into the mountains was slower than anticipated. The rocky slopes shifted beneath their boots, dust and small stones skittering down into the valleys below, carrying the faint metallic tang of the Pale Visitor's machinery. Commander Brinjar led the forward companies, spear in hand, scanning every ridge and overhang for signs of movement. The mountains were alive with subtle vibrations that made his teeth chatter and his stomach lurch, a constant reminder that the engine was awake, watching, and aware. Soldiers gripped weapons tightly, moving in precise formations designed to protect both the advance and the flanks. Engineers carried interference nodes, each device humming faintly with energy, ready to destabilize the constructs they knew would be encountered below. Brinjar felt the weight of command pressing down like the very mountains themselves. Every step forward risked triggering unknown traps, activating defenses, or alerting the engine to a strategy they had yet to form. Yet retreat was unthinkable. Humanity had already bled too much to abandon the path now. "Steady," Brinjar muttered, more to himself than to the soldiers around him. Major Allard moved beside him, hammer strapped to his back, eyes scanning the jagged ridges for any unnatural patterns in the stone. "The sensors are picking up energy fluctuations," Allard said quietly, "beneath the surface." The engine is stirring more than we anticipated. Brinja nodded. He felt the vibrations too, resonating through the soles of his boots, through the muscles in his legs, into his very chest. We proceed carefully, no missteps. Every node, every formation, every measure must be precise. If the engine senses error, we may not survive its response. The forward scouts, small teams of lightly armored soldiers with enhanced vision and sensors, darted ahead, moving along narrow ledges and crevices. They reported back continuously, projecting holographic overlays of the terrain into the commander's displays. Brinjar studied them, noting patterns of movement in the mountain's subtle shifts. The rock itself seemed aware, as if it pulsed in accordance with the engine's presence. As the day wore on, the sun broke through patches of clouds, casting harsh light across the rugged cliffs. Shadows stretched long, providing cover, but also amplifying the sense of menace. Suddenly, a deep rumble shook the mountainside. The soldiers froze. Brinjar felt it in his bones before the sound reached the ears of his men. Rocks tumbled from higher ridges, and dust erupted in small clouds around the path. "Brace yourselves," Brinjar shouted. Soldiers dropped to knees, gripping their weapons, while engineers secured their nodes against the shaking ground. The tremor passed, but the warning remained. The engine was aware. They were no longer moving through empty stone. They were navigating the nervous tremors of a sentient network. Brinjar signaled for the scouts to advance. Minutes passed with tense silence, broken only by the subtle hum of the interference nodes. Then, from the shadows of a jagged cliff, the first guardian appeared. Unlike the earlier constructs, this one was more massive, its segmented body coiling upward like a living tower. It was partially camouflaged against the rocky wall, but its luminescent seams betrayed its form. Soldiers fired automatically, magnetic rounds tearing into the armored segments. Sparks flew, some of the seams ruptured, but the construct remained unfazed. It moved with deliberate purpose, aware of every projectile and adjusting its position accordingly. Brinjar shouted orders: "Target the joints, focus fire, engineers, adjust the interference nodes now." The engineers activated new pulses, sending waves of energy that rippled through the construct's segments. It convulsed slightly, but adapted within seconds, twisting to compensate for the destabilizing frequencies. Brinjar knew they had only a brief window to strike a critical point. He moved forward, spear raised, calculating the trajectory and timing needed to hit a seam that might disable the creature. With a leap, he struck, piercing the seam and feeling the vibration of the construct's internal energy pulse surge through the spear. Sparks and luminescent fluid sprayed, and the guardian recoiled. The soldiers pressed the advantage, coordinated strikes, tearing at exposed seams. Slowly, the massive construct began to falter, its precise movements breaking down under the combination of human ingenuity, firepower, and interference pulses. As the guardian collapsed, a portion of the mountain itself shifted, revealing a narrow passage partially hidden beneath rock formations. Brinjar studied the opening. The passage descended sharply, dark and ominous, but it offered the only route further into the mountains where the engine awaited. "Prepare to descend," he commanded. "This is where we will face the heart of their network. Every precaution, every measure, nothing reckless." Soldiers readied themselves, adjusting harnesses and securing equipment. Engineers carried interference nodes along, ensuring that their devices would continue to destabilize energy channels along the descent. Brinjar led the way, moving cautiously into the passage. The air was dense, tinged with the metallic resonance that seemed to echo from deep within the mountain. Shadows danced across the walls, shifting in response to their movement, creating illusions of larger forces than might actually be present. As they descended, the tremors intensified. The mountain itself seemed alive, responding to their presence with subtle shifts that kept them alert. Brinjar kept his spear ready, knowing that the guardians might emerge from hidden crevices at any moment. The descent continued for what felt like hours, though Brinja knew that time had become fluid in this oppressive environment. Then, suddenly, the passage opened into a vast subterranean chamber. It was enormous, far larger than any natural cavern could be. The walls shimmered with alien metal, pulsing faintly with internal energy. At the chamber's center floated the engine, a colossal construct of crystalline lattice and interwoven machinery, suspended in midair by forces they could barely comprehend. Its core glowed with a radiant intensity, streams of energy spiraling outward to connect with smaller constructs that hovered like sentinels around the chamber. Brinja felt a wave of awe and dread. This was the heart of the Pale Visitors network. The engine's presence radiated awareness, intelligence, and purpose. It was as much alive as it was mechanical. Soldiers instinctively formed defensive positions around him, weapons raised. The engineers moved forward, placing interference nodes at critical junctures in the chamber, attempting to disrupt the energy flows connecting the engine to its sentinels. Brinja observed the engine's response. The luminescent filaments linking the floating constructs quivered and shifted, as if acknowledging the interference. Pulses of energy spread across the chamber, scanning the human formation, probing their capabilities, testing their resolve. Brinja gritted his teeth. "It is aware of us," he said. "Every node, every movement we make, it senses. We cannot hesitate." Major Allard stepped forward, hammer raised, and nodded to Brinja. "Then we strike together. Engineers maintain interference. Soldiers target any sentinels that advance. Brinja, I will follow your lead." Brinja inhaled, focusing his mind. The engine was a nexus of intelligence, but it was not infallible. Its perception, though vast, depended on the flow of energy, the coherence of its constructs, the integrity of its lattice. Disrupting that network, even briefly, could give them the edge needed to reach the core. He signaled forward. Soldiers advanced with calculated precision, opening fire on approaching sentinels. Magnetic rounds struck the floating constructs, causing them to shimmer and quiver. The engine responded by sending pulses of energy, shaking the chamber and throwing some soldiers to the ground. Brinja charged, spear in hand, weaving between the surges of energy. He drove the tip of his spear into the first sentinel, piercing its core. The construct convulsed, releasing a pulse that momentarily interfered with the engine's network. Engineers adjusted the interference nodes to take advantage of the disruption, amplifying the destabilization across the chamber. Major Allard struck a sentinel with the hammer, splitting it open, sending shards of alien metal across the floor. Soldiers pressed the advantage, coordinated strikes and careful fire, disabling the remaining sentinels. The engine pulsed again, faster, more violently. It was aware that its defenses were compromised, that the interference and coordinated human attack had created vulnerabilities. Brinja gritted his teeth and advanced further, spear aimed at the heart of the engine itself. Energy filaments lashed out, attempting to strike him, but he dodged and plunged forward, using the momentary disruption caused by the disabled sentinels to his advantage. The spear connected with the engine's lattice, and a brilliant cascade of light erupted, spreading through the crystalline structure. The engine convulsed, pulsating violently but did not collapse. Brinja felt the resonance in his chest intensify, a psychic weight pressing against his thoughts, probing, testing. He gritted his teeth, holding firm, refusing to yield. The engine's awareness pulsed, searching for weaknesses, calculating, adapting. Brinja and Major Allard, supported by the soldiers and engineers, pressed the attack. Interference nodes flared, projectiles struck, and the spear remained lodged in the lattice. For a moment, the chamber was filled with brilliant light, energy pulses, and the deafening hum of alien machinery. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the engine's activity stabilized. The pulses slowed, the lattice quivered and dimmed. Brinja pulled the spear free, chest heaving, eyes fixed on the floating construct. It remained suspended, still radiating energy, still aware, but the disruption had given them a foothold. The soldiers lowered their weapons slightly, allowing themselves a brief moment of reprieve. Brinja knew the battle was far from over. The engine had been disrupted, but it had not been destroyed. It would adapt, respond, and seek to regain full control. Yet for the first time, he felt the possibility of victory. Humanity had survived impossible odds before. They had endured through ingenuity, resilience, and sheer determination. And now, standing at the heart of the Pale Visitor's machine, Brinja understood that their survival and the future of their species depended on continued courage, precise action, and the relentless will to confront what seemed impossible. The chamber was silent, except for the low hum of the engine's lattice, a vibration that resonated through the stone floors and into the very bones of those standing within. Commander Brinja moved carefully among the soldiers, each step deliberate, eyes scanning for subtle signs of movement. The engine floated above them, massive, radiant, and unyielding, yet the disruption they had caused the day before had left its network unstable. The human forces had gained a temporary advantage, but Brinja knew that advantage could vanish in an instant. The soldiers were tense, gripping weapons and tools, ready for the slightest flare of aggression. Major Allard stood beside him, hammer at the ready, scanning the chamber for any sign of sentinels or secondary defenses. Brinja felt the weight of responsibility heavier than ever. This was the moment when human ingenuity would be tested against a force that had destroyed worlds, that had mastered both technology and biology beyond their comprehension. One misstep, one hesitation, and the engine could annihilate them all. Brinja took a deep breath and surveyed the floating lattice of the engine. Light pulsed through the crystalline structure, following patterns that suggested thought, calculation, and adaptation. The engine's awareness extended through every filament, every construct, every pulse of energy. Yet even as he observed, he recognized a flaw, a fissure in its adaptive rhythm, a subtle lag in response caused by the interference nodes and their coordinated attacks. It was small, almost imperceptible, but it was enough. Brinja signaled to the engineers. "Amplify the nodes," he instructed. "Focus on the unstable segments. Maintain the pulse. We do not have long." The engineers moved quickly, adjusting settings, synchronizing energy outputs, and monitoring the response of the engine. The lattice quivered and shimmered in response, tendrils of light flickering like the heartbeat of a living entity. Soldiers prepared to strike at exposed seams, their weapons calibrated to penetrate the crystalline armor. Brinja grasped his spear tightly, feeling the resonance of the chamber echo in his chest. He knew that precision and timing would be everything. With a nod from Brinja, Major Allard led the soldiers in a coordinated advance. They moved swiftly, taking advantage of the unstable sections of the lattice. Magnetic rounds struck exposed seams, while hammers and spears punctured critical points. The engine convulsed, pulses of energy surging through the chamber, throwing debris and unprepared soldiers off balance. Brinja held his ground, advancing step by step, spear aimed at the heart of the lattice. The engine reacted with force, sending a wave of energy outward. Brinja felt it against his chest, but he planted his feet and drove forward, forcing the spear deeper into the core segment. Light flared, filling the chamber with blinding brilliance. He could feel the engine's awareness probing his mind, testing his resolve, seeking to comprehend the nature of humanity. Brinja gritted his teeth and focused on the one truth that had carried them through every battle, every encounter with impossible odds. Humanity endured because of unity, courage, and relentless will. With that thought, he pressed the spear further. A chain reaction rippled through the lattice. Segments trembled and fractured, releasing bursts of energy that disrupted the engine's connections to the sentinels hovering in the chamber. Soldiers pressed the attack, striking simultaneously with coordinated precision. The engine's hum rose to a deafening pitch, then faltered, as if uncertain, as if struggling to reconcile the unexpected variable introduced by human determination. Brinja felt the chamber vibrate violently, the floor shaking beneath his boots. Dust and fragments of crystalline filaments fell from the ceiling as the engine writhed, pulsing and flaring. The soldiers held their positions, unyielding despite the tremors, despite the brilliance of the light that threatened to overwhelm their senses. Major Allard struck one of the exposed segments with his hammer, shattering it, sending shards flying. Brinjar followed immediately, spear driving through a weakened filament that connected multiple nodes. The pulse of the lattice faltered further, its rhythm broken, unstable. The engine emitted a soundless wail that reverberated in their minds, a psychic echo that sought to instill fear and compliance. Brinjar ignored it, holding firm, letting human resilience define his response. "Forward," he shouted. "Do not allow it to recover. Every seam, every node, strike now." Soldiers surged, engines, accelerators, and spears driving coordinated strikes. The interference nodes amplified the disruption, sending waves through the lattice. The floating constructs, sensing instability, attempted to compensate, but the human tactics had created multiple simultaneous vulnerabilities. Brinjar pressed closer to the heart of the engine. Each strike of his spear drove the lattice toward collapse, each pulse of energy met with human ingenuity. Sweat ran down his brow, muscles screamed, but he moved with determination, guided by the singular goal of ending the threat. The engine's flares intensified, light bursting outward, threatening to blind them, yet Brinjar remained focused. One final motion, precise, calculated, and unrelenting. He drove the spear through the central nexus, aligning the tip with the weakest point revealed by the interference and the earlier strikes. Energy surged outward in a brilliant cascade, illuminating every surface, every soldier, every fragment of the chamber. The engine convulsed violently, then fractured. The lattice began to collapse inward, the floating constructs losing cohesion and crashing into the floor. Pulses of energy rattled the chamber as the heart of the machine destabilized. Brinjar staggered, gripping the spear, feeling the weight of the collapsing structure. Soldiers cheered despite the danger, moving carefully to avoid falling debris. The engineers amplified the final pulses from the nodes, ensuring the engine's recovery would be impossible. Light dimmed, the chamber settling into a heavy, resonant silence. Brinjar took a long breath, looking around at the exhausted faces of the soldiers and engineers. The engine, the instrument of destruction, now lay in shattered remnants, its lattice fractured, its constructs inert. For the first time in weeks, a sense of quiet settled over the mountains. Major Allard approached Brinjar, hammer resting against his shoulder, sweat and dirt streaking his face. "It is done," he said simply. Brinjar nodded, feeling the truth of those words, though he knew the battle had come at great cost. Soldiers began to survey the chamber, gathering wounded, assessing equipment, and examining the remnants of the engine. They found fragments of alien machinery and crystalline lattice scattered across the floor, glowing faintly as residual energy dissipated. Brinjar moved through the debris, placing a hand on a fragment of the lattice. It pulsed faintly, but inert. The engine's awareness was extinguished. The chamber itself seemed to breathe in relief, the vibrations settling, the shadows retreating. Soldiers who had fought in countless engagements across the plains and ridges of the mountains stood in quiet acknowledgement, the enormity of their achievement sinking in. Humanity had faced a force beyond comprehension and endured. Brinjar turned to his men, his voice carrying across the chamber. "We have faced the impossible and prevailed. Let this victory be a testament to our endurance, our unity, and our resolve. We have survived, and we will continue to endure." The soldiers responded with murmurs of affirmation, their eyes reflecting the faint glow of the shattered lattice. Major Allard stepped beside Brinjar. "What now?" he asked. Brinjar considered the question carefully. The mountains held no more immediate threats, but the pale visitors had been relentless in their expansion, their designs, and their intelligence. They had been stopped here, yes, but their presence across other star systems remained a threat. "We secure this site," Brinjar said. document everything. Gather what we can from the remains of the engine, then we report back. Humanity will be stronger for this, wiser for this, and we will prepare for whatever comes next. Soldiers began the work, moving carefully through the chamber, collecting data and securing fragments of the alien constructs. Engineers assessed the nodes and interference devices, making notes for future replication or study. Brinjar allowed himself a moment of reflection. The journey through the mountains, the confrontation with the Guardians, and the ultimate engagement with the engine had tested every skill, every ounce of courage, and every measure of human ingenuity. Yet the victory had been achieved not through brute force alone, but through coordination, adaptation, and the relentless will to endure. As the day waned and the first rays of light filtered through fissures in the mountain, Brinjar stood atop a ridge overlooking the chamber, watching the team work. The hum of residual energy persisted faintly, but it was no longer a threat. It was a reminder of the intelligence they had faced and overcome. The soldiers, engineers, and scouts moved with purpose, understanding that their actions here would ripple through human history. Humanity had survived the impossible. Humanity had endured the challenge of an alien intelligence far beyond its own. And in the heart of the mountains, against the radiant lattice of the pale visitors, engine, humanity had demonstrated that its greatest strength lay not in technology alone, nor in numbers, nor in firepower, but in the unity, courage, and unyielding resolve that burned within every human soul. Brinjar exhaled, the weight of command easing for the first time in weeks. The battle was won, the engine neutralized, and the human spirit had endured. Across the mountains and the plains beyond, life persisted, fragile yet determined. And as Commander Brinjar looked to the horizon, he understood that this victory was not an end, but a promise. Humanity would continue to rise, to adapt, and to endure no matter the threats that awaited among the stars.